Denny Laine, born Brian Frederick Hines, was born on October 29, 1944. He is a lauded English musician, singer, songwriter, and guitarist. Denny was an original member of the Moody Blues, singing the band's first hit Go Now in 1964, and also an officer in Ginger Baker's Air Force, 1970, where he played lead guitar on their debut album. Denny is perhaps best remembered, however, as being Paul McCartney's co-commander in the great band Wings from 1971 to 1981. Denny Laine was born in Birmingham, where he attended Yardley Grammar School and took up the guitar as a boy. Denny's first solo performance as a musician was at the age of 12, wherein he began his career as a professional musician, fronting Denny and the Diplomats. In 1964, Laine left the Diplomats to join Mike Pinder in the Moody Blues and sang the group's first big hit, Go Now. Other early highlights included I Don't Want to Go On Without You, another UK hit, and the two minor UK chart hits, From the Bottom of My Heart, I Love You. And Every Day, both written by Laine and Pinder. He also sang on Can't Nobody Love You and Bye Bye Bird, which was a hit in France. A self-titled EP and the magnificent Moody's LP on Decca followed. Laine and Pinder wrote most of the Moody Blues B-sides during the 1965-66 period, such as You Don't, All the Time, and My Baby's Gone, as well as This Is My House. However, Laine's tenure with the band was relatively short-lived, and after a number of comparative chart failures, Laine quit the group in 1966 and was replaced by Justin Hayward. The last record issued by the Moody Blues, which featured Laine, was Life's Not Life, backed with He Can Win, in January of 1967. Now, after leaving the Moody Blues, Laine formed the Electric String Band in December 1966, which featured himself on guitar and vocals, Trevor Burton of The Move on guitar, Viv Prince, ex-Pretty Things, on drums, and electrified strings in a format not dissimilar to what the Electric Light Orchestra would later attempt. In June 1967, the band shared the bill with the Jimi Hendrix Experience and Procol Harum at the Savile Theatre in London. However, this group did not really achieve national attention, and the Electric String Band broke up. About the same time, Laine recorded two singles as a solo artist, Say You Don't Mind, backed with Ask the People, April 1967 on the Durham label, and Too Much in Love, backed with Catherine's Wheel, from January 1968, also on Durham. Unfortunately, both records failed to chart, although Say You Don't Mind became a number 15 hit in 1972 when recorded by former Zombies frontman Colin Blunstone. It was then that Laine and Burton went on to form the band Balls from February 1969 until the band's breakup in 1971, with both also taking time to play in Ginger Baker's Air Force in 1970. Only one single was issued by Balls, Fight for My Country, backed by Janie Slow Down, on UK Wizard Records. Altogether, some 12 tracks were recorded for a Balls album, but to date has never been released. But 1979 was a banner year for Denny Laine, when he joined Paul McCartney to form Wings, and stayed with the group for some 10 years until it disbanded in 1981. Laine provided lead and rhythm guitars, sang lead and backing vocals, keyboards, bass guitar, and woodwinds, as well as writing or co-writing some of the group's finest material. Laine, McCartney, and McCartney's wife Linda McCartney formed the nucleus of the band. With Wings, Laine enjoyed the biggest commercial and critical success of his career, including co-writing the hit Mull of Kintyre, which reached number 1 in the UK in 1977 and became the UK's highest-selling single of all time. Laine also co-wrote and sang lead vocal on Deliver Your Children, which was released as a Wings B-side but charted in the Netherlands. In January of 1980, McCartney was arrested for possession of marijuana on arrival at an airport for a tour in Japan. The tour was canceled, and the band members, except Linda, returned to England. After returning home, McCartney decided to release his solo album, McCartney 2, and plans for an autumn U.S. tour were scrapped. Meanwhile, Laine released the single Japanese Tears, and eventually a solo album of the same name that December. He also formed the short-lived Denny Laine Band with Steve Holley. On April 27, 1981, Laine announced that he was leaving Wings for good due to McCartney's reluctance to tour in the wake of John Lennon's tragic murder. Floundering for a bit, Laine soon signed with Scratch Records and began working on a new album, Anyone Can Fly. He then went on to record other solo albums such as Hometown Girls, Wings at My Feet, and Lonely Road, before returning to Scratch to do his first Wings at the sound of Denny Laine. He also recorded the solo work Ah Laine, wrote the musical Arctic Song, and released 2 more albums, Master Suite and Reborn. From 1997 to 2002, Denny toured with the rock supergroup World Classic Rockers. Later he joined and toured with the Criers. Denny was married to singer, model, and legendary supergroupie JoJo Laine, with whom he had a son Lane Hines and a daughter Heidi Hines. He has 3 other children from other relationships, including a daughter with Helen Grant, daughter of Led Zeppelin's manager Peter Grant. Hello, this is Geoffrey Giuliano, and I wanted to just chat informally about my relationship with Denny Laine, such as it was. I first met Denny on the High Street, St. John's Wood, in a pub in the company of Chrissie Hynde from The Pretenders, and of course, his inimitable, highly original, one-of-a-kind, charmingly beloved JoJo Laine, whom I was staying with in her flat there, which she bought, I believe, from the proceeds of a expose that she did at the end of Wings in the London tabloids. Good move, JoJo. It's worth a lot now. After having been introduced to Denny over drinks at the pub, we were joined by Mickie Most, the famous 60s producer of most of Donovan's works, and Jeff Lynne from Electric Light Orchestra. It's kind of a rock and roll street. There's a lot of people around there. Not far from McCartney's house in St. John's Wood, and of course the famous zebra crossing in front of Abbey Road Studios. And a nifty little place it was. At the time, I was overseeing the writing and production of the memoirs of his wife JoJo. They were, I believe, divorced, but still very good friends. Denny's a kind of hard man to know. He's got a social side, which is perfectly reasonable, but to kind of dent the armor is not easy. But we did have some kind of relationship and spent some time together. Traveling around England, I remember, to some of his pubs, later hanging out at his home in Windsor with his new wife, Helen Grant. That's right, Helen Grant from Peter Grant of Led Zeppelin fame. There was talk of me doing a book with Denny, but ultimately that morphed into Denny doing the introduction and supplying a great deal of research, both in speaking with me and supplying very rare documents for my book, Blackbird, The Life and Times of Paul McCartney, to which I thank him very much indeed. Having been an integral part of that project, it then came to pass that Denny, drifting around the world, ended up at my place at 735 East Market Street in Lockport, New York, a great big Gothic manor house overlooking the Erie Canal. Denny stayed for about 6 months and didn't really do much aside from playing the guitar, which, as his profession was, as a world-famous guitar player, seems now perfectly acceptable. At the time, I wondered, what the hell is he doing up there, just like somebody's old dad? Eventually, JoJo showed up, and the 2 now divorced lovers took up residence once again and for a final time at my place. Now, there was talk for a time of me managing Denny Laine, and even a contract was signed, but nothing really came of it. Denny being difficult, and me perhaps even more, so the twain just didn't meet. But there were, in fact, many memorable jam sessions in the downstairs living room of my old home, wherein Denny would pick up the acoustic guitar and breeze through songs like Mull of Kintyre and Blackbird to everyone's absolute astonishment. He really could play. Eventually, and with some regret, Denny and I fell out, as he liked to say, with me having said something I think I shouldn't have to the British tabloids about what Denny was up to, and at which he took great umbrage. Sorry, Denny. Anyway, time rushes on, and all I have of those heady days at the helm with Denny are a collection of very fond memories, and this interview, which you're about to hear, recorded at Mark Studios in Clarence, New York. I believe I paid Denny $500 for the pleasure of sitting down and discussing just about everything I could think of for several hours. This then represents the best of that long-ago session. I hope you enjoy it.
Tell me about the first gig you ever played with the Beatles. And
well, the Old Hill Plaza, you know, they had revolving stages, you know, the kind of thing where one band finishes and the other one, as the other one's been announced, they swivel around and that's it. We were closing the first half and the Beatles took over from us. Now, all I remember is, you see, I used to work in a store. It's the only job I ever had, was a music store in Birmingham. And I was working in the piano and electrical department, and I was listening all day long, obviously, to the radios which were on, you know, as part of the sales job. And I heard Love Me Do. Now, from that day, I heard that, because it was harmonies, I guess, and it was because it was an original song. I was pretty sort of taken to the Beatles. And so when I did that gig, and that they were, I think, promoting Love Me Do, and maybe the next single after that, which was Please Please Me, was it? I don't know. And so I was a little bit of a fan already. And when they did that and all the people were screaming and they were doing autographs afterwards, I was pretty impressed, I must admit. And that's what made me decide that I wanted to move to London and go that next step further.
obviously, Denny and the Diplomats, you and worked with the Beatles. Tell me about the first time you can recall working with the Beatles as the Moody Blues.
Well, by that time we had already met the Beatles. I mean, we all used to meet in a club called the Ad Lib Club, which was not really a rock place. It was a club, very expensive club, where like the drinks were very expensive. We met the Beatles and other people in the business over a period of, a few months. We eventually I got friendly with George and then John. Gradually got to know them all. Then as a friend of theirs, I suppose, or as friends of theirs, and we used to have parties they used to come to, we were invited to do the tour, and then eventually we signed to NEMS Enterprises, which is Brian Epstein's company, and used to do lots of NEMS dates, different places. But we did the Beatles tour because they invited us, to close the first half.
What kind of specific memories do you have of touring with the Beatles in those days? Any funny little anecdotes?
I can remember how they were. They definitely were a sort of group. You could tell that they'd been together a few years because they just bounced off one another like it was going out of style. They knew, they were like in private they were like an act as well as being on stage. And we used to go to places like we'd be staying at some country club, and I suppose in those were the days we used to drink and smash a few glasses and have a good laugh. And the owners of the places would expect us to be nice boys, but we weren't quite as nice as they expected. I suppose that's where the first reputation of groups like, smashing places up, but not completely.
Surely the Beatles don't have a reputation as being...
I beg to differ, I can remember a few sort of glasses of water being spilt. I'm not going to go any further than that. It was pretty harmless stuff, but of course it was blown out of proportion, and the time, years later, when the Who used to smash up hotel rooms or whatever, or toilets, and rip things out the wall, that was a development of something that everybody was doing,
So, now as far as Paul McCartney's concerned, how did that relationship first develop?
Well, Paul always being the sort of person in the Beatles who was probably the most outward going. He was always the songwriter that tried to sell his songs all the way down the line, or get to know people. He was probably the most friendly. Deep down the others were pretty friendly when you got to know them, but he was the most commercially friendly, if you like. And he tried to get me to do Those Were the Days, which is a song he did with Mary Hopkin later, as you know. he kept playing me this song, and I thought, yeah, that's a good one. You know, he could tell that we, as a group, could do a good version of it. We didn't eventually get round to doing it, but, you know, I became his friend on a songwriting level, I suppose.
Well, Roehampton, tell me, what were those parties like? Were you into pot in those days? I mean, was it that, were you there yet?
It was early days for pot.
Probably speed and things, weren't you?
No, it wasn't speed at all. We used to smoke pot, but it was new to us all. You know, it wasn't us that came up with the idea of smoking pot. It was more the people who came to the parties, like the managers or the you know, friends of this and friends of that. People who are already the establishment in London, in other words, the socialites, you know, the party goers. They were the people that turned us on to things like that. And a lot of the cases, we weren't so crazy as they wanted us to be. We would kind of not be that involved in that because, you know, after all, we were more drinkers than we were druggies, you know. But we delved into things, obviously. We tried it. We used to smoke pot, yeah, sure. But discreetly in a back room. It wasn't that kind of a party, you know. There'd be too many people out of the business. And we weren't, as I say, we weren't doing anything really outrageous. And that is what, in some cases, I'm a little bit disgusted with the press because things leaked out that really didn't happen, you know, and it gave us a worse reputation than we deserved.
Us meaning not just the Moody Blues, but the whole circle of musicians.
The whole circle of musicians, yeah.
How was your relationship with Paul during those post-Moody's years, between Wings and the Moody Blues?
Well, I didn't really have much of a relationship with Paul. He was kind of living in London. I was living outside. I was living kind of Putney area. And a lot of people who lived in London didn't mix with the people who bought houses out of town. And John Lennon was one of the people who moved to the area near me. And in fact, when I did go over to his house one night to see the Shea Stadium film that he'd got on cassette, and you know, I suppose I developed a relationship with him before I did develop one with Paul in those days.
So were you dropping acid with John?
I'm not literally with him, but I mean, we were all doing it at the same time. I mean, I can remember one day that I was coming down off some acid and I bumped into him, went over to his house and we went off somewhere. And maybe, I don't know whether he just started one or whatever, whether he'd had one, but he was definitely stoned and we were both stoned. We went to the Alexandra Palace and, you know, we were kind of surrounded by people immediately. We walked in. It was one of these big. It was a kind of a
happening.
A happening, yeah. They were all smoking banana skins and it was all pretty much of a laugh in those days. But looking back at it, even more of a laugh. But anyway, somebody spat on John, and it really didn't, you know, do him any favours. Like psychologically, he just couldn't handle it. I couldn't handle it, and we just left and went home. And I suppose that's when we started to realise that that, you know, drugs were dangerous and things, and you tended to think, read more into a situation than was actually happening. Probably we could have dealt with that situation a lot easier if we hadn't been on drugs. So, I mean, there was always that thing about drugs that we never got too involved in it, you know. It was the unfortunate people who hung around us who were the ones that took it too far.
Right. From what I've been able to gather, it was the string band which caught the attention of Paul McCartney, because, as I say, you had done something quite unique. You'd had the cellist and you put a classical element, which is kind of interesting because the Moody Blues at the same time were also doing something kind of similar to that.
Yeah.
But anyway, Paul eventually rang you and invited you, must have been around somewhere in 71, where he invited you to join Wings. Tell me about that phone call. Where were you and what happened?
Well, by this time I'd gone back to not working with, but living around my first manager, who was Tony Secunda. In other words, the Moody Blues manager. Without him, we wouldn't have made it, that's for sure. You know, he was the ideas man. So I was kind of staying with Tony, and I was staying in the back room office, actually. There's a room off the office, and it was in a very expensive area in London, but, you know, I was broke. And he was managing Mark Bolan at the time, in fact. And I was also going up to Essex Music with another friend of mine, Denny Cordell, who was sort of partner of Tony's, and Denny was putting together people like David Bowie, Joe Cocker, Procol Harum, some others, you know. We all used to go up to make demos at Essex Music anyway. And so that, again, I developed a few friendships with these people. So I was kind of doing that, writing, helping to write songs. And then the phone goes, and as though he'd been seeing me every day for the last 10 years, he says, "Hi man, what you doing?" I said, "Who's that?" "Paul." "Paul who?" He went, "Paul, you know." And then I sussed who it was. I said, "Well, what's happening?" He said, "Oh, well, I've just, I've done this album, Ram," as though he did, as though he didn't thought that I'd know he'd done an album, Ram. Like, I said, "Yeah, I have heard about it. Yeah, go on." He says, "Well, I'm trying to put a band together, and the guys who did the album don't particularly want to put a band together," and he was being a little bit cagey, didn't come straight out with it. And he said the drummer wants to do it, but the others don't. And he said, "Do you fancy doing something?" I said, "Yeah, fine." He said, "Well," I said, "Where are you?" He said, "Scotland." He said, "Meet Denny Sywell at the airport tomorrow. There'll be a ticket waiting for you. See you tomorrow." And that was it. I flew to Scotland and we went from there.
Well, what actually happened when you got there?
Well, I mean, I was a little bit amazed that he was living, in the back of Beyond, in a very, very small farmhouse that obviously had started to work on. I think what had happened was, when he was with Jane Asher, they'd bought this place, or he'd bought this place and I think he'd only ever seen it once. I don't think that she liked it too much, so they never went there again. But people had bought it for him as an investment, and he'd gone up there with Linda. She'd liked it, and they decided to settle there or use it in the summer. So it was kind of, Paul McCartney living in I suppose what other people would call, squalid, not squalid, but rough. Cheap surrounding, rough surrounding, which kind of appealed to me, I like the fact that we can go and live any lifestyle and still work and get things together, and it's peaceful and it's away from
Was that the
prying
first
eyes.
time you'd met Linda McCartney?
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So what was your first, impression there? Because obviously you read a lot about her.
Yeah, I liked her, because I met her in that environment as like a mother, and she was doing the cooking, and she said to me that she admired my work that I'd done with the Moody Blues, and also that she'd heard a Coca-Cola ad which we'd done, which she thought was pretty original, and she liked that. I mean, I'm very well with Linda all the way through.
So when you went up to Scotland, there was Denny Sywell, you, Paul McCartney, Linda McCartney, and who else?
And Denny's wife.
And Denny's wife, but there were no other band members at that point.
No.
So you had a drummer, and what did you do? Play lead guitar, or just sort of rhythm, and he played bass?
Yeah, I suppose, yeah.
And then
it wasn't lead. I mean, if you've only got one guitar, you play rhythm and lead. You got to stand on your head.
When you first joined Wings, what were you doing? Just busking, sort of, to get your feet wet, playing Buddy Holly and stuff?
Well, yeah, whatever.
What was the daily schedule like up there, kind of thing?
Well, he had a little studio in the barn.
4-track, 8-track?
4-track that had, obviously EMI had sent up some equipment for us to use. I'm not quite sure what the first thing we did, but I mean...
Well, Wildlife was the first album.
Yeah, so I mean, we were kind of... Those are some of the songs that Paul was working on, and as you know, there was Love Is Strange was on there. So we were doing kind of a mixture of things, rehearsing-wise. That album came out of it, and again, that was just a very simple thing. I mean, we did actually do that in London, but we still did it very...
Where'd you record Wildlife?
EMI. But, Abbey Road. But the thing is, I think we did. I'm really bad on things like that, but I'm pretty sure it was at Abbey Road.
Well, let me just go through some of the titles here, just to refresh your memory. Mumbo, Bip Bop, Love Is Strange, Wildlife, Some People Never Know, I Am Your Singer Tomorrow, and Dear Friend.
Mm.
Did you have a hand in writing any of those?
No.
So the McCartney-Laine songwriting partnership hadn't really, you were just basically playing and singing
Yeah.
some backup?
Well, yeah, but I mean, obviously, you know, when you talk about writing, even though you don't get the credit for it, because normally it's like the music is written by one and the lyrics is written by another if you're collaborating. Well, in that case, you know, as far as like a top line would be written, as far as the vocals concerned, and then the music would be written maybe just on a guitar or a piano. I mean, what you fill in, when you fill in the holes, you know, I'm contributing to that, obviously. So, in that sense, arrangement-wise and ideas-wise, I was contributing, but I wasn't credited for that. But that goes for lots of things that I've done since as well.
I hear that there was a little controversy over Wildlife because they eventually had to put a sticker on the front that said Wings Wildlife because there was nothing on the front and people didn't actually know who the hell it was.
Well, again, I think that, you know, we were keeping a low profile. We were a new band, even though the public didn't think so. We felt we were. We weren't trying to push it as, you know, we weren't trying to do anything amazing because we were kind of green to it. We were starting. But again, you know, even after we were called Wings and people knew us, they were still calling us Paul McCartney Wings in certain areas because it was more of an attraction.
Right. Tell me about that first tour, because you actually toured following or adjacent to, I'm not sure which end it was, to Wildlife. You guys did that tour, didn't you? The first tour.
Well, we
Was it the
thought...
first tour, the college tour?
Yeah. So we decided that we wanted to play to a ready-made audience without advertising. Now, obviously colleges, you know, like I have on campus, they have residents and you've got an audience. So wherever you go, you can just get there, announce it, and that night they're going to be there, right, without the press. So that was one of the reasons we picked universities.
So what did you do? You got a big caravan?
No, we got a little, like, mini bus, you know, 12-seater bus. And then we had a van with the equipment in, obviously. And we stayed in cheap hotels. We picked up the hotel when we got to the town.
What was the story you told me about that some of the people didn't know it was Paul and Linda and that guy?
Yeah, one night we were having fish and chips after the gig. The guy was a bit of an arsehole, the landlord. Because I suppose he didn't know who we were. We were just a group to him, just another band. But, you know, like all these out-of-town people, a lot of them are very greedy and they'll take money off everybody and then moan at you afterwards. Anyway, we'd left some fish and chip papers or whatever. We'd cleaned away as much as you do. But what are you going to do? Leave it... You know, there's no bins in there, so we leave it on the bar or whatever. And he came down in the morning and was arguing, shouting at one of the roadies. And I mean, Paul was just so pissed off. And he still didn't say anything. Nobody knew that it was Paul McCartney. And I think Paul kind of, you know, nudged him accidentally on purpose, just to sort of, oh, sorry, mate, you know. Because he was so fed up with this guy's attitude. I mean, it didn't hit him as such, but just kind of nicked him. And the guy was threatening to call the police and all sorts of things. I mean, if that guy ever to this day ever found out it was Paul McCartney, I don't know, but I hope he did, because then, you know, it showed him up to be the arsehole that he was.
Was that an isolated instance, or were there other kinds of things like that on that first tour?
No, I don't remember too many things like that, to be honest. I mean, most places we went, we were recognised, you know. That's why that one stands out.
Well, how did people react when they thought they were getting, you know, Ricky and the Red Stripes, and all of a sudden they got Paul McCartney? How'd they react?
Well, you'd better ask them. I don't know. I mean, I suppose there was a certain amount of, like, you've got to be joking, you know. Who are you trying to kid? But sure enough, they were there on the night and we were there, and it went down great, you know.
Well, it went down great, but there was always that question. I know right from the first days of Wings, really, to the very end, about what the hell Linda McCartney was doing there, other than the fact she was a nice lady, and like you've told me before, you've got nothing bad to say about her, but musically, I mean, what the hell was she doing there?
Well, in you know, the main reason she was there is because she was sort of Paul's wife, and they wanted to be together. That's it. What can I say? You know, if the fact that she couldn't play anything seemed to be immaterial to Paul, because he would teach her little things to do, and teach her a few harmonies to do. Now, I always kind of resented it because I felt that like we could have been a better band a lot quicker if we'd have got a keyboard player. Not that I minded Linda being around, but as a musician I wasn't too keen on the idea.
Did you voice this opinion, or did you keep it to yourself?
No, I kind of wasn't. I was always saying we've got to get ourselves, you know, a real keyboard player. I was always kind of going on about that. And in fact, she agreed. You know, she was never wanting to be the keyboard player with Wings, but it just never came about.
Did she want to be in Wings at all?
Well, I think she wanted to be a part of it, yeah. As a photographer, come, you know, influence, somebody who had something to say, you know.
What's ironic is that, you know, despite all the human shortcomings of JoJo, you know, which may or may not be there, she's a lot better singer than Linda McCartney, isn't she? She could have added a lot to Wings, you know, if only it could have been looser. In terms of backups,
well,
anyway.
That's true, in a sense, but there again, she didn't fit personality-wise. I mean, she was just too neurotic and, well, maybe she wouldn't have been neurotic if she'd been accepted. I don't know that, but, you know, in other ways of life, you know, that I've experienced with her, she's too neurotic to be in a band. Whereas Linda was more, she could, you know, more durable and could stand the life more. So in that way, she was, you know, she did deserve it.
Well, I think it's curious that you know, Linda was really slagged all through those years, but you said to me that, well, really, I don't have anything bad to say about Linda. So you really had a good relationship with her, didn't you?
Because I knew her. You know, it's like if you see anybody from a distance, you know, you don't. I mean, a lot of girls slagged her off because she married Paul McCartney, you know, and death threats and all that sort of thing. Which, obviously, if they'd known her, there wouldn't be any of that. So, I mean, I knew her as a person. We got on very well together. We, you know, we could talk to each other. She certainly wasn't an idiot by any, you know, shake of the stick. She knew what she wanted, and she stuck to her guns. She reminded me a little bit of John Lennon, believe it or not, because she had that kind of attitude of, she believed a certain thing and nobody was going to change that, because she had information and she did her homework to back it up.
Do you think she was like, in some way, she's a little older than Paul. Do you think she was in any way, she was certainly a strong presence in his life, but a mother figure? Do you think that's fair to say?
Oh, yeah, I would say so. Yeah. You know, there's nothing wrong with that.
No.
I mean, a lot of people have that relationship, you know, but...
Did he defer to her if there was an argument with, you know, was she the
what
sort
do
of...
you mean, in the band?
Well, just in anything, I mean, it sort of was, who wore the pants in the family kind of thing, I mean, was it...
He did in some respects, but certainly not in all respects. I mean, I think that she, you know, her down-to-earthness kept him down-to-earth.
So she didn't want all the limos and all that?
Well, no, not really. But there again, you know, it was necessary. And that's it. You know, if you're going to expose yourself to that kind of an audience, you've got to live that life. I mean, you cannot not have security. You cannot not stay
in the subway.
Yeah, exactly.
And
so I mean,
excuse me, all the way through the crowd to your on stage.
I mean, what you got to remember is that Linda was from quite a rich family anyway, and was used to all the trappings, and was, you know, not fighting it, but she'd already had all that, and she wanted a little bit of a simpler life, I think, you know, and I think that balanced him out a little bit.
So you think without Linda he would have been more flash?
Probably, yeah, but again, it's hypothetical. You know, Paul always wanted that simplicity side of life in his life. So, you know, he found it, and she helped him to do it, and they're still doing it.
In a way, they're sort of spiritually inclined, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. They really are. I mean, she's a vegetarian. He became a vegetarian. Some people laugh at that, but, you know, if I'm around my missus and she wants to do something, I might say, I don't know about that to start with, but then eventually I see the value for me in that, and I will do it. And that's really what's kept them together. You know, I mean, for a couple that's been together all these years and virtually inseparable, I find it too good to be true. I mean, I can't believe it.
Well, one of the things that Jojo, I asked Jojo a couple times, well, was there any evidence that he, he's one of the most handsome, desirable, most sought-after men in the world. Did he ever, get a little bit on the side? And the answer from Jojo, who obviously, if there was any thread that it could be true, she would be the first to say yes, and this is what happened. She said no.
No.
They were totally monogamous, inseparable couple.
That's what I mean.
So,
I never saw any evidence of it. And that, that is, well, I mean, if I had, I wouldn't be able to say that. Because,
But it just so happens.
It just so happens that I never saw any evidence of it. There was, obviously, the big girls, hanging around who liked him, but because she was there, there'd be a certain respectability in the air that, stay away.
Jojo said that she didn't like any foul language, that you had to be careful what you said.
She didn't like swearing. But there again, neither did my mother, It's kind of an upbringing which I can respect in a way, but there again, when we all get drunk and we're having a good time, we all swear and shout, So in some ways, she was a little bit too, I don't know.
Uptight?
Not uptight, but too Miss Goody Two-Shoes, in some ways. And yet, like, in some instances, you could have a little bit of a laugh and a joke with her, and she would laugh, She was kind of, I think maybe again her upbringing.
I can't remember if it was you or Jojo that told me that you guys were in Abbey Road or something telling a dirty joke, and she walked in the room and it was, oh, come on lads, now Linda's here, sort of thing. You'd have to immediately curtail.
Yeah, but I mean, that can happen with lots of people, But she was definitely, unless she'd been in on the dirty joke to start with. But it's not like she was that much of a prude. She really wasn't. It's just a kind of an image that they projected and they stuck to as well. Of course, there was lots of kids around too. You got to remember that. So that was part of the thing as well.
So whereas Paul might be a hippie in some ways, he's a very straight sort of Liverpool dad.
Well, yeah, but so am I. We all are up to a point. I think because they're in the public eye that they made a bit more of a point of it. In fact, in my opinion, too much of a point of it. But there you go. That's their prerogative, I suppose. But as I say, she liked a good laugh and a joke as well.
Let's go back to Wings for a minute now. Henry McCulloch, how did he get into the band? And he came along in that Wildlife had come out. He wasn't on the Wildlife album, but during that university tour, he was there.
Yeah, I got him the job. Henry was a friend of mine from the Joe Cocker band.
Grease band.
Yeah. I knew those guys. I knew them, through mutual friends. I'd met him. I used to go to their rehearsals. I knew Joe really well. At the time of little help from my friends, I was around in those days. And, I don't know, we were just looking for another guitarist, The point was, I was never really the lead guitarist in Wings. I was always the man who helped do the writing. And whatever I played on the record, I couldn't play the lead and the rhythm.
Played bass quite a bit, I noticed.
I played some bass, some keyboards, and did some... when I would be doing harmonies, I couldn't be playing the lead guitar across it. So we would always bring in a lead guitarist. And Henry was like a blues-based guitarist who could also turn his hand to other styles. Like he was very into Irish folk music. He was into, show music. He was into all sorts. Which, when he played the solo on My Love, proves that he played that on one day in a studio with an orchestra, and we did it live, and that was that.
I mean, he came up with that.
He came up with that solo right off the top of his head.
Ooh.
So, he was the kind of guy that fitted musically exactly because he balanced out the sweet side of the band. But of course, then Henry was a bit of a case on the road. He liked to drink, and he was never very good at timekeeping, and he was a little bit. He
wasn't too diplomatic either, was he?
No, he was a bit of a rebel in that sense. But there again, I don't mind people like Henry. I can remember Henry like falling over one night doing a solo and not getting up for the rest of the set, which I thought was funny. But at the same time, you think, well, wait a minute, and him doing that every night, he's a bit of a loony.
Wasn't it Henry that was with you in some place? Where was that? Tell me that story when some guy said he was going to shoot Paul.
Yeah.
Where was that?
Can't remember exactly where it was. I think it was Sweden. We were in a club which was next door literally to the hotel, so we didn't have to take any limos or any heavies with us. It was literally the next door, so we just walked in. And some guy no, Paul and Linda were in there already. Henry and I walked in, and Paul and Linda were looking very scared. And he said, some guys just threatened me with my life, you know. He said he had a gun. So, partly because I don't know whether it was protection towards Paul or whether I was worried of getting shot as well. And we had a little scam. Henry went one side of the club and I went the other. And we eventually moved seats until we got right next to this guy. Then we confronted him. He didn't have a gun. He was all apologetic and he was just trying it on, you know. But of course that could have been the opposite. So, you know, yeah, there's certain times you have to take the law into your own hands because you don't have the heavies around, you know. And in some cases the heavies cause more bloody trouble. You know, non-professional heavies can cause more trouble than they have to.
In other words, it could be handled with a word, but
exactly.
They go straight in.
Exactly.
Now, your first single was Give Ireland Back to the Irish. You certainly started off with a bang of controversy. What's the story on that one?
Well, again, Paul was, you know, quite innocently trying to solve a problem which can't be solved just overnight with a song like that. And obviously a lot of Irish people took umbrage to it, you know, and it can be frightening. It's a little bit like another friend of mine who's a comedian who tells Irish jokes and he's been threatened. Now, you know, all right, so I wasn't too keen on doing that as a song, to be honest, because of that. You know, I'm a little bit...
You anticipated there would be problems.
I anticipated there would be problems, yeah. Because it was a little bit naive of him, I thought, to write a song called Give Ireland Back to the Irish. Because, I mean, I certainly didn't know enough about the struggle and what the problem was to be able to write that. Maybe Paul did, I don't know, but he went ahead and wrote that song. As a result of it, we did get a lot of picketing, you know, at gigs and things. I mean, at one point I had to sort of put my toe down and drive through people, not knocking people over, literally, but forcing them to jump out the way to get out. And I think even Henry's brother was beaten up or something in Southern Ireland as a result of it. So, I mean, it's very difficult, you know, when you're writing songs about everything in life, not to be controversial, and you're obviously going to upset some group or some individual. And, you know, as I say, that's one instance I'm not particularly happy about, or wasn't at the time, certainly.
And now we're going over to speak to Paul.
This is have a seat. I got a funny machine. It's got the microphone right there. It's a funny one, but it works. Just talking about your time. Right. Evening all.
Hey, what do you want to tell the people?
I want to tell the people. I want to tell the people to keep coming and seeing us because we need the crowd, you know. We can't work without the crowd.
Did you like that suit?
Loved it, yeah.
Did you like the crowd?
Good audience, man. Friendly. You know, I mean, it's been very similar in a lot of places, but, you know, every night is slightly different. Tonight was a very easygoing audience. I liked it.
What do you think was the best date on the tour so far?
Oh,
The one where everything was
you got me
together,
there.
everything was right.
It's that different. Look, I mean, New York was great. We made a lot of goofs, but it was a great show. So, but tonight, you know, was a different thing again. You can't. It's all down to the audience and the whole thing.
What group were you with before?
Moody Blues.
Moody Blues. I read somewhere that one of you two were, and I couldn't remember which one.
Yeah, long time ago. And more strings attached than Matt Devine.
What was the first time that you recorded with Wings?
5 years ago. Near enough. I can't remember.
So you're almost from the beginning.
Oh, yeah. Well, for this band, I'm the only original member. there was another drummer originally before me on Ram, things like that.
How did McCartney first approach you to join the group?
Call me up on the phone.
Simple.
No, he knows me, you know, he knew me from before. From the Moody Blues used to tour with the Beatles and things like that.
Isn't it true that Moody Blues are doing another album right now?
I don't know. You better ask them. I mean, I don't have anything to do with them, you know. I mean, I was in the band, I haven't seen them for years. So I have no idea what they're doing.
From the original concept that Wings had like 5 years ago when you first joined them, to the phenomenal concept which they've evolved into today.
Thank you.
No, really, seriously, you know. Have you been able to change with it without any problems? Have you enjoyed the change?
Sure. I mean, look, you know, there's a lot of changes we're going to go through from here. We've been through a lot of changes before. I mean, obviously I enjoy it because I'm something to do with it, you know. We always want to keep going on. We don't want to stagnate. We've got to change. So if I don't dig the changes, I ain't going to dig being in the group.
What do you think would be the next change for Wings?
The next change would be a lot of time off.
A pleasant change.
Musically, it would help
acoustically
us.
or what?
Nah,
No?
not really. I mean, we're good on stage at the moment. It's because we haven't done that much stage work that we love stage work. You know, so the next development will probably be live recording, I hope.
You know, now the Band on the Run album was recorded in Nigeria, is that correct? Lagos, whatever. I understand you had quite a bit of problems getting that album together due to various elements that existed at the time in that area of Nigeria. What was one of the main problems that you were involved in?
Well, to tell you the truth, there wasn't any problems getting that album together because, you know, when you go through a period of somebody, you got a group and it's not happening sometimes, then all of a sudden somebody leaves and somebody else leaves, it makes the rest of the people have to do it. And that was the story. So we didn't have any problems. We would have probably had more problems if we'd gone there with that group. And we probably wouldn't have come out with Band on the Run, you know.
How about the area itself, you know, that you had to work, the conditions you had to work under? Were they all right?
There was no problem. I mean, it was old recording equipment. Grant, they were still building the studio when we were in there. But generally speaking, I mean, the whole feel of the place was so, you know, good for us. Inspiration, the old drumming scene and all the rhythms. Fabulous. I mean, that helped us more than anything.
How many times have you toured America?
Never.
This is the first time?
How about that? Never.
How do you like it compared to Europe?
Well, the crowds are a little bit more responsive. Yeah, right from the beginning. You know, European audiences tend to be a little more, we've seen it all before kind of trip, you know. But they haven't.
Have you had any trouble anywhere?
Nah, not at all. It's been practically the same as you saw tonight.
Mm-hmm.
Generally speaking, you know, as I said, it differs from number to number. It gets to the point where we know which numbers go down the best after a while. Which numbers we expect not to go down well, and they do go down well, so, you know, it's confusing in a way.
Have you run into much anti-English sentiment around various sections of Europe due to the pro-Irish factors?
Not at all. How about that? Not at all.
They seem to like your music for just being its music, right?
I mean, what do you mean exactly? Why should we? I mean, we don't run into problems like political problems, is that what you mean?
Correct.
Yeah, but we don't have that kind of rubbish, you know. Let them get on with it.
You always try to get to the controversial side of things.
Yeah, I know. But I mean, Give Ireland Back to the Irish was a song from years ago, you know. We haven't, 4 years ago, exactly. We did actually have a bit of trouble at the time, but this is complete another section, another period in life we've come across now.
You still all live in England?
Yeah. I mean, we've got too much going for ourselves in England to move out. We like England.
You don't think of moving out at all?
Well, I haven't so far. Might do, you never know.
How much longer are you going to be in the United States?
Another 20 gigs.
I have someone here. Someone here wants to ask you, what do you think about Prince Margaret's separation?
I didn't even know about it. I didn't even know about it. But good luck to her, she's only human.
Well, there was some problem at first with your getting the visas to get in the country, like last fall or whatever.
You probably know why. Me telling you.
But listen, did it throw your own psyche off, your own touring habits off or anything?
No. I mean, we've taken it at a steady pace. We've done enough gigging to last us. We don't have to work in America. We didn't have to. But it got to the point where we would like to very much. And then by the time that all that problem was sorted out, we did work here. So probably cost us a fortune to get in, but But at least the Americans are better to us than the Japanese, because the Japanese won't let us in at all.
Why won't they let you in?
Well, for the same reasons you lot wouldn't let us in, it's kind of red tape. It takes you a year to get in when you've had trouble. Don't tell me you don't know why we couldn't get in the country.
We all know why.
Well, read between the lines, folks.
Okay. Well, listen, it's getting late, and I guess you've had a long night, and we thank you very much.
Thank you, Johnny. That's Johnny King.
Nice one. You tried, lads.
Geoffrey Giuliano is the author of some 30 internationally best-selling books on the Beatles, John Lennon, and other iconic musicians of the 1960s. In 2006, his book, Paint It Black, The Murder of Brian Jones, was made into a film by Stephen Woolley and Nick Powell entitled Stoned, The Wild and Wicked World of Brian Jones. It remains a cult classic and the only film bio of the Rolling Stones. Giuliano is also a veteran journalist, having written for dozens of high-profile newspapers and magazines, including The Sunday People, The Daily Mail, The News of the World, The Mail on Sunday, Playgirl, and Rolling Stone. A noted film actor, Giuliano starred in such movies as Vikingdom, Scorpion King 3, Jules Verne's The Mysterious Island, The Fifth Execution, Far Cry 3, Fire Desire, among many. In addition, he hosted the long-running North American syndicated radio series, Geoffrey Giuliano's Roots of Rock, for 5 years, as well as pioneering the audiobook industry in the 1990s by authoring, narrating, and producing over 250 original, non-book-based, interview-driven productions. Giuliano's publishers included Random House, HarperCollins, Delta Entertainment, Durkin Hayes, Playaway Audio, Speechworks, and B&B Audio, among dozens more internationally. In 1998, Random House acquired his firm Tribute Audio, for which Giuliano acted as CEO and publisher for 5 years. His best-selling audiobook, That Fateful Night, True Stories of Titanic Survivors in Their Own Words, was nominated for a Grammy. In 2014, Geoffrey Giuliano founded Icon Editions and G2 Media Arts to market his updated works as well as publish new projects. As a visual artist, Geoffrey has been showing in galleries across America since 1977, garnering impressive reviews. His first professional assignment was designing several T-shirts for The Who's Pete Townsend in 1976. Geoffrey also designed and illustrated many of his original rock biographies for the biggest publishers in the world from 1984 to 2006, as well as designing for his pioneering record label, Samba Records, in the mid-1990s. From 2006 to 2011, Geoffrey was also the primary designer for the French fashion house Cotai. When Giuliano first conceived of creating his own literary imprint, Icon Editions, he became responsible for illustrating and designing 35 book covers, several hundred CDs, DVDs, as well as dozens of promotional posters, and eventually an entire collection of exclusive fashion and art. The expansive Design by Giuliano brand grew out of Geoffrey's impressive commitment to the arts and is the culmination of a lifetime's work by an extraordinarily talented and determined Renaissance man. Produced by Matt Kay and Alex Frankie for Icon.